Tiberias, year 1187. The sun burned mercilessly over the fields of Galilee as the history of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem approached an abyss. There, amid rising tensions, veiled betrayals, and hasty decisions, a conflict would erupt that marked the beginning of the end for the Crusaders in the East, the Battle of Tiberias. This episode not only foreshadowed the catastrophic defeat at Hattin, but also laid bare the weaknesses of a kingdom divided between personal ambitions and the absence of its legitimate king, Baldwin IV, the Leper King. In this video, you will learn the dramatic details of this battle which, although often overshadowed by major clashes like Montgisard or Hattin itself, was a true turning point in the history of the Crusades. What led the Frankish leaders to leave Jerusalem unprotected? Who were the protagonists of this crisis? What was Baldwin's role, already removed from the throne, but still alive and alert to the looming dangers? Stay with us until the end and discover how the flames that consumed Tiberias were not just physical. They also foretold the collapse of an entire Christian project in the Levant. In the 12th century, the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem lived between the glory achieved by the First Crusade and the constant threat of powerful Muslim enemies, especially under the leadership of Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. Baldwin, crowned while still young, ruled with courage, despite the leprosy that slowly consumed him. Around him, the Crusader nobility was divided between political factions, marital alliances, and personal interests. Meanwhile, Saladin consolidated his power, uniting the Muslims under the banner of jihad. This precarious balance set the stage for the impending clash at Tiberias. The city of Tiberias, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, was a symbol of Christian presence in the region and also a strategic point for controlling Galilee. Ruled by Raymond III of Tripoli, one of the kingdom's most experienced and ambiguous nobles, Tiberias became the epicenter of a crisis that would expose the internal cracks of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. In the year 1187, Baldwin no longer reigned in practice. Weakened by leprosy and internal disputes, he had appointed his nephew Baldwin V as king under a contested regency. Guy of Lusignan, son-in-law of Queen Sibylla, faced suspicion from all sides, both from the barons and from Baldwin himself, who never fully trusted his leadership. Raymond of Tripoli, who had previously served as regent, found himself in a delicate position. Resentful for being passed over in the succession, he sought to secure his own domains in the face of the Muslim threat and the instability in Jerusalem. It is in this scenario that Saladin, patient and strategic, sees his opportunity. After years of consolidating his authority and promoting campaigns of Islamic unification, he decides to test the Crusaders' readiness and the strength of their alliance. In April of that year, he begins a series of skirmishes in the north of the kingdom, directly challenging the lords of Galilee. Saladin sends a detachment to attack the outskirts of Nazareth and threaten Tiberias, hoping to provoke a rash reaction. Raymond of Tripoli, who had negotiated a private truce with Saladin months earlier, a gesture interpreted by some as treason, sees his loyalty brought into question. When Saladin advances directly on Tiberias, Raymond's wife, Eschiva of Buris, remains inside the fortress under siege. The siege was more symbolic than effective, as the city had good defenses and provisions to withstand. Even so, Saladin's gesture carried political weight. It provoked the Crusaders, struck at Raymond's pride, and forced the kingdom to make a decision. Gathered in Jerusalem, the council of the boy king Baldwin V was divided. Guy of Lusignan, under pressure to act, saw in Saladin's movements an opportunity to demonstrate leadership and gain the trust of the nobility. Some lords, such as the master of the temple Gerard de Ridefort, advocated immediate military action, fearing that inertia would be seen as weakness. Others, more cautious, suggested waiting and observing the enemy's movements. Raymond, aware of the trap being set, advised prudence. He claimed that Saladin sought exactly that, to lure the Crusaders north, wear them down under the summer sun, and force them into battle on unfavorable ground. His warnings were ignored. Accusations of treason and collusion with the enemy struck deeper than his words of wisdom. Thus, in a gesture of asserting authority, Guy of Lusignan summoned the Christian army. The contingents departed from Jerusalem, advancing northward, crossing arid regions, scarce in water. The march was long, arduous, and poorly coordinated. The Crusader forces, though numerous, were exhausted and ill-prepared for the coming battle. Instead of protecting Tiberias, they fell into the Sultan's trap. As the Crusaders advanced, Saladin kept his troops disciplined and well-positioned. His generals, many veterans of campaigns in Egypt, Syria, and against the Franks, followed his meticulous plan to wear down the enemy through heat, thirst, and delay. When they finally approached Tiberias, the Christians found the Muslim army entrenched, reinforced, and ready for the offensive. Tension reached its peak. The city itself was not in immediate danger, but pride and honor demanded action. Guy, pressured by his more belligerent advisors, chose a position near the hill of Hattin, a rocky elevation west of Tiberias. There, the Christian troops set up camp, but without reliable access to water, it was the beginning of disaster. Saladin then launched the final offensive. He ordered the routes to water sources to be cut off and began small attacks to disrupt the Christian camp. The forces of the Latin kingdom, already weakened, began to falter. What had started as a plan to relieve Tiberias turned into an open-air siege, a slow suffocation. At this moment, the fates of Raymond, Guy, and the kingdom itself hung by a thread. Baldwin, confined and ill in Jerusalem, received fragmented reports of the events, aware that the battle unfolding at Tiberias was not merely a military clash. It was the reflection of the slow political decomposition of the kingdom he had fought so hard to keep united. When the Christian troops camped near the hill of Hattin, close to Tiberias, it was already too late to retreat. The hasty decision to march under the scorching Palestinian summer heat without guaranteed water supplies had doomed the soldiers to exhaustion. Saladin, patient and methodical, positioned his army in a crescent formation, surrounding the Crusaders and cutting off all access to water sources. At the same time, he ordered the dry pastures around Hattin to be set on fire. The flames, combined with the heat and dust, created a suffocating hell around the Christian army. Saladin's maneuver aimed not only at military victory, it targeted the psychological collapse of the Crusaders. The smell of smoke, the screams of horses, and the torment of thirst shattered morale. Amid the chaos, some knights attempted to break the siege, among them Raymond of Tripoli, who led a desperate charge with part of the cavalry. Miraculously, he managed to escape alive and return to Tripoli, but many would accuse him of cowardice or even collusion with the enemy. That flight would be remembered with ambiguity, salvation to some, betrayal to others. Meanwhile, Guy of Lusignan remained at the center of the storm. Lacking the charisma and authority to inspire desperate men, he saw his leadership corroded hour by hour. The master of the temple, Gérard de Ridefort, fanatical and impetuous, also tried to lead fruitless attacks against the Muslim lines. They were easily repelled. As men collapsed from exhaustion or were struck down by Turkish archers' arrows, the Crusader military structure crumbled. Finally, on the 4th of July of 1187, Saladin delivered the final blow. His emirs attacked simultaneously from all flanks, breaking any attempt at coordinated resistance. The Christian troops, surrounded, dehydrated, and hopeless, surrendered one by one. The banner of the cross was brought down, and the Norman knights, Templars, and Hospitallers fell in alarming numbers. Those who survived, especially the nobles, were captured. The defeat at Hattin, and consequently the loss of Tiberias, was the most devastating ever suffered by the Crusaders since the founding of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Guy of Lusignan was captured and brought to Saladin's tent. There, the Sultan treated him with courtesy, but with evident disdain for the arrogance the Crusaders had shown before the battle. Gerard de Riedefort, as master of the temple, was spared, unlike most of his Templar brethren who were executed en masse by Saladin's order. It was a clear message. Jihad would not forgive the warriors who most fanatically persecuted the Muslims. The fall of Tiberias and the defeat at Hattin had immediate consequences. Saladin, now facing no significant military opposition, marched almost unchallenged to the south. Nazareth, Acre, Haifa, and other coastal cities fell in succession. The gates of Jerusalem, unprotected, became the next target. The Latin kingdom, built with such effort since the First Crusade, was dying. In Jerusalem, Baldwin IV was no longer alive. Having died months before the battle, in April of 1185, he was buried with honors, but left behind a kingdom torn by rivalries. The brief reign of his nephew Baldwin V, who died under mysterious circumstances, gave way to the troubled coronation of Guy of Lusignan, supported by Sibylla. Many barons, such as Raymond, refused to recognize his legitimacy. Without the firm hand and strategic clarity of Baldwin IV, the Crusader leadership descended into chaos and distrust. The tragedy of Tiberias symbolized the failure of that leadership. It was more than a military defeat. It was the breaking of the fragile pact among the kingdom's lords. Baldwin's warnings, made during the years he still ruled despite leprosy, proved prophetic. He had warned that without unity, the kingdom would perish, and so it did. But Saladin's victory was not merely the result of his military genius. It was also a direct consequence of the Crusaders' internal decay, political corruption, and inability to adapt to a new geopolitical landscape. The Sultan, respected even by some Christians for his honor and strategy, conquered Tiberias not only with the sword, but with intelligence and time. Esquiva of Bures, Raymond's wife, survived the initial siege. After the defeat at Hattin, she surrendered Tiberias to the Muslim forces. She was treated with respect, as was common among nobles, and sent to Tripoli. Her fate is scarcely documented, but her name remained tied to the final downfall of the Frankish presence in Galilee. With Tiberias in flames, both literally and symbolically, the Latin kingdom entered its death throes. The Crusades, which had begun with religious fervor and promises of redemption, now faced their own shadow. Internal fragmentation, unpreparedness against a more cohesive adversary, and the absence of figures like Baldwin, capable of uniting faith and reason in the exercise of power. From that point on, the entire Holy Land would be reconfigured, and although other crusades would be organized in the following years, including the one led by Richard the Lionheart, the strategic loss of Tiberias and the disaster at Hattin would never be fully reversed. The Latin world of Jerusalem burned, and from its ashes a new order in the East was born. The fall of Tiberias, followed by the disaster at Hattin, was not merely a military episode, it was the consummation of a foretold destiny. Since the days when Baldwin fought to keep the kingdom united, it was already clear that the survival of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem depended not only on the strength of arms, but on political wisdom and internal cohesion. Tiberias, with its besieged walls, its flames, and its inevitable surrender, became the symbol of all that was lost when prudence gave way to ambition. Baldwin, even physically absent in that fateful year of 1187, remains the lucid shadow of a kingdom on the brink. His effort to contain Saladin, his careful alliances, and his firmness in the face of illness stand in stark contrast to the errors of those who followed. The story of Tiberias is, at heart, an elegy to the leper king, and a reminder of what happens when men refuse to heed the voice of reason. If you were moved by the story of Tiberias in flames, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with other lovers of medieval history. May the lessons of the past continue to illuminate our present.